My name is Richard Freudenberger. I'm an employee here at Living Web Farms. I run the sort of manage the energy and resources of the farm here. This farm is called Mr. Ed. It's an educational farm here, the school, and the farm itself. And then we have another farm called Grandview, which is about a couple miles down the road, and that's there's a little more livestock down there and some biochar activity going on there. And then we have another farm on the North Fork of the Mills River, which has some other things going on, which we really just started. But basically, this being the educational part of things here, and this is where most of the classes are held. We're conducting everything here. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about alcohol fuel, ethanol. It's the same kind of ethanol that they mix in with gasoline. When you go to the pump, almost every bit of gasoline in the U.S. now is 10% ethanol, regular fuel. There's good and bad things about mixing ethanol with gasoline, and I'll get into that later on. We're just going to go through the process of describing not only what ethanol is and how we can use it and all that, but actually taking it from the raw materials here. I've just got a few things here. And this is some barley. This is a pretty good stock for a feedstock. That's a starch-based product. Anything with starches generally can be used. Some things are a lot better than others. It's a decision you'll have to make if you're seriously thinking about getting into it. You look at things like, which we'll go into later. We look at things like how many tons per acre the crop might yield, or how many gallons of ethanol per acre it yields. That all depends on the conversion of the starch to sugars and then into alcohol. So we can use potatoes, we can use barley, rye, corn. There's just a lot of things. Probably 98% of the ethanol product that's made in the U.S. today is made out of corn. And there's some good things about corn, but in general, at that level, at the something like 14.3 billion gallons a year that we manufacture, corn is sort of a debilitating crop for the soil. It demands a lot of the soil. So, the whole point of our discussing small-scale ethanol is that we can use other crops, and they don't have to be food crops necessarily. I mean, that's another big argument is food versus fuel. Why are we growing food and then just turning it into fuel when people could be eating it? That's true to some extent, but I'll explain to you why in most cases it doesn't really work out if you really look at what we're taking from the feedstock and what's left over and how we can use that. The other end of things is the sweet types of crops. The apples, sweet sorghum, sugarcane. Extremely high production value with sugarcane because it's just all sugar. I had spent some time in Brazil, where before my time there, 1975, I believe, was the first year they introduced the program, and by the mid '80s, early '80s, they were really whole hog going for it, and basically the whole country made a wholesale switch to vehicles that were run on almost 100% ethanol. It's costly to get 100% pure ethanol, so what they just made about 94% pure, which is fine. A little bit of water in it does not really hurt anything. And the motor companies, there are Ford Motor Company, GM, Toyota, Mercedes, a number of others, Fiat. There's some bus companies. They actually have manufacturing facilities in Brazil. So they were told. Of course, Brazil at that time was not a democracy, so they weren't asked. They were told, you guys are going to start making cars because we have a crisis. And the crisis is they were going into bankruptcy. The federal government was going into bankruptcy due to their foreign oil commitment, their loans for buying oil. And the president at that point made a decision to convert the entire nation to ethanol, and which he did. Now, it didn't ever come completely to ethanol, but at this point today, there is three choices. When you pull up to a pump, you have ethanol, you have gasoline, and you have compressed natural gas. And the pumps actually have a lever on there that allows you to select what you want. The cars are built, many of them are built to take either any fuel. The Fiat Siena, a modern car, I have a picture of it in there. When you pull up to the pump, it has a chart, and it says, today the price of natural gas is this much, price of alcohol is this much, and the price of gasoline is this much, and you can decide what you want, and you can put it in the car. In the earlier days, to get the people going, they initially converted police cars, postal vehicles, telephone trucks, electric power, that kind of thing. So these fleet cars were running around with alcohol, and then while the factories were manufacturing the cars, they started a whole cadre of curbside mechanics. These guys would set up their tools on the corner. For $40, you pull your car in, you go to work, you give them your keys, and you come back at lunch, the car's ready to take alcohol. And so that's how they did it. And they just, that sort of caught up everybody into the process. It worked out pretty well. I mean, there were glitches, and there was a time at which when gasoline was extremely cheap, which it is now too, people sort of didn't really abandon alcohol, but they sort of got away from it a bit, and the gasoline became more popular for several reasons. But they have sort of leveled out now, and it's just part of life there. And they try to export the alcohol here. We have some pretty stringent export or import quotas on their alcohol or anybody else's. So we like to make our own and keep the prices high. But the farmers are very pleased and happy to make the big farmers in the Midwest. That's basically who's driving a lot of this is the corn states, Iowa and Nebraska and Illinois and some of those other states where the many of the farms depend on alcohol, depend on corn and a guaranteed price for their product, which isn't always the case, and so they just sell it for manufacture into fuel. So my background, just really briefly, is initially many years ago I was an automotive editor and sort of an engineering tech for a couple of automotive publications in New York City, and so I learned, I knew a lot about cars, about engines and power plants and that kind of thing. I was recruited out of New York to work for Mother Earth News, the research center there. We had a 624-acre research facility, which was farming and green building and a lot of different things, including biofuels. And so I just got involved with that, and we initiated an entire program of alcohol fuel back then, where I sort of got my feet wet and got everything grounded in there. In those days, things were a little different, and we didn't have the technology we had today. We were firing the stills with wood because that cut the cost down dramatically. But I've since learned that wood is, even then knew that wood is pretty difficult to control. So it's the temperatures and this kind of stuff have to be sort of maintained at different levels, at a specific level, so and held there. So it's hard to do that with a wood fire because it goes up and down all the time and whatever, unless you go through an intermediate stage and then you can do it. But I have always dabbled in the alcohol production. I carried the permits for the company for many years until we just abandoned. I just didn't really have any more facilities. We sold the research facility, so I didn't have any more reason to really do that. But a lot of the alcohol production is very, very similar to making beer or wine, and that's basically so because we don't have a big. I have some pictures of much larger stills, 300, 150, 300, 600 gallon stills, but we don't have that right here. So, I'm just demonstrating here with what we would do here with on a much smaller scale. And if anybody has made beer before or made wine, they'll recognize the stuff. I mean, it's all very, very similar to what we would do initially to make alcohol. Of course, with the alcohol production, we're on a much larger scale. I mean, normally would be. I'm talking about bushels and bushels of corn and tons of potatoes, or whatever, if you really are going to make some fuel. So that's basically it. What we're going to talk about through the rest of the class today is permitting. The permits we need to at the state and federal level to conduct this, and it's really not as bad as it might seem. It's a lot easier than say filling out your tax returns. We'll talk a little bit about economics. We will talk about equipment, of course. We'll talk about feedstocks, like we just sort of mentioned here, some of this kind of thing. I'll try to point out some of the, the better. I will point out the better crops to choose. Although some crops in areas in certain parts of the country, there is a lot of land that's arable, but not really that suitable for normal market crops. So there's an opportunity there to grow certain other types of crops that don't really do well I mean, that actually do well in soil that isn't that good. So that might be an opportunity for some, for some people to actually grow on that kind of land and harvest and use the product there. What I'm doing here just now is I'm just heating up some prep water. It's actually called hot liquor. There's no liquor in it. It's just called hot liquor. Technically, that isn't really hot liquor, but it's just a supply of water I want to heat to a certain temperature, so we don't have to wait for it later. That's what's happening. This is just a propane-powered propane tank down here, propane-powered outdoor cooker like you might use on some outdoor cooking thing. I believe about 178,000 BTUs in this little one. You have to, when you shop for this kind of stuff, if you're interested in doing something on this smaller scale, you have to be aware of the fact that even though they look similar, some of them don't put out enough heat to make. This is a lot of water. This will hold it's a 15.5 gallon container, stainless steel. It'll hold, I work with 10 normally, but it'll hold 15, and then after that it's going to start boiling over. So we don't necessarily have to boil everything. It just has to be heated to a certain. It may be 160. It may be simmering. It may be 190. Something like that. Or we can boil it depending on what we need to do. But that's what I'm doing now is just prepping it here. I've got a thermometer here, just basically a frothing thermometer. They use them in the dairy industry or dairy farms. Just basically something to read in Fahrenheit. It can be centigrade or Fahrenheit, but this one's actually not the frothing one. This is one for like hot oil when you're cooking turkeys, but it still reads, all I'm trying to read is up to boiling, so it has a good meter on it. And I'm just checking to make sure where we are. I just want to get it up to a simmering point. Start at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Actually I measured a 60.4. And now we are at it's still going. Now we are at 130. So we still have a little ways to go. I want to try to bring it up to somewhere 175 maybe or something, just to keep it going. Most of the heat is down here, and once in a while we can stir it just to get the layers of heat so they don't there's no gradients of heat in there but we want to bring that hot water up to the top if we can. It's just something I couldn't find my regular paddle, so I cut one last night out of a piece of spruce, or fir, I guess it is, which is okay. One thing I want to say, and I'm going to be saying it several times, and I'll have to remind myself, by far and away, when people make mistakes, when your fermentation turns sour or goes rotten, goes bad, or doesn't ferment properly, or the yeast the yeast in the fermentation doesn't thrive, it's almost always because your containers are not clean. And we have, that's one of the cleaning solutions I use. It's in the bottle. The stuff I use, it's a no rinse. You can buy stuff that you have to spray it on there or wash it on, and then you rinse it out. That's an extra step. I don't need that. We can just use this no rinse stuff, and there's a couple different brands. Star San is one of them, and I don't know what the name of the other one is. I have it in here. It's actually a branded product. That's the store that sold it just put their name on it, so it's probably a powdered version of Star San. And then there's another product. If you're using this equipment over and over again, there's what they call a PBW, which is powdered brewery wash, and it's what the breweries use to clean there's sort of a lime stone skin or line that forms on this equipment over time, and the PBW just cleans that off. So every once in a while you gotta get in there, rinse it out. That'll take that off. They're all fairly innocuous chemicals. They're not anything not as opposed to chlorine, which the dairy industry uses a lot. We have used chlorine in the past. There's a special chlorine. I didn't bring it with me because I don't really want to push it, but there's a chlorine wash that you use when you're what they call cleaning in place. If this apparatus was permanent and it would be piped together with stainless steel and there'd be a distillation tower coming out of there, I don't want to take it all apart to clean it. So we pump this cleanser through there and then rinse it with water every pretty frequently actually, and then it cleans everything up for the next run, so we don't have a situation where there's bacteria in the pipes. The bacteria, what happens is the yeast, a good strong yeast, will be able to conquer a weak bacteria fairly easily. But if you got a good strong bacteria and you've got a yeast that hasn't really been inoculated well enough, it's going to be a battle, and then you may not. It'll work. Yeah.
What about using ozone or peroxide?
It's probably just expensive. Peroxide would probably be okay. I don't know about ozone. I don't. Yeah. Well, you mean liquid ozone? Okay. I thought you meant the ozone light, which would sterilize. Yeah. Yeah, that would be okay, but this stuff is...
gas.
Yeah, well, this is so cheap. That's the thing is, you don't have to rinse it. I mean, I've never used peroxide, but I use peroxide as a replacement for chlorine bleach. Like if you have mold or something, that's the only way to go because it's not chlorine. It's great. It's safe.
Toxic.
It's not toxic, exactly. Yeah, that's a good question, and I just have never used it. The thing is, when you're boiling something, you don't have to worry about it. I stick this in there. I didn't really clean this. I mean, I did last night. I just gave it a little wash with this, but I mean, I laid it on the dirt and I put it on the table here. I don't care because I'm going to stick it in there when the water is going to be boiling, so it's going to kill anything. Once you have stopped boiling, once you're at a step where you're not going to boil anything anymore, everything that this water or your mash is a mixture of water and whatever crop you're going to use. Anything your mash touches after that, if it's not going to be boiled, has to be clean, and including, the thermometer, the thermometer that we measure with, the hoses, the nozzles on here. It's not that it won't work, that it'll destroy it immediately if it doesn't, but it just if you take those steps to make sure everything's clean, you'll eliminate any of the problems that you might have had. And just a little bit about terminology. I just caught myself here. I'm going to use the word mash and wort interchangeably, although it's not really the same. In beer making, in liquor making, and in wine making, they all have different terms for basically the same thing. I basically, you're going to hear me say either mash or wort. Especially with beer making, wort is that's basically your grain mixed in with your water, and before it actually gets fermented. So, and after that, after the yeast works on in fermentation, then it can be called mash. So, but when I say either of those, I just mean the grain and the water mixed together. So, that's just a terminology issue. And the other thing is, I just from a legal standpoint, and I usually say this in the beginning, we don't make liquor. I mean, it's the same process and everything. I'm not worried about whether this water happens to be potable, but I'm not worried about it because we're not going to be drinking this. This is purely for making into fuel. So that removes a lot of the issues that we'd have with your water purity. Now it does have to be good water without toxins in it, so that it doesn't kill the yeast. But essentially, a lot of the issues that you'd have with beer. In fact, I'll guarantee you that at some point somebody who a beer maker may see this video later on and say, "Oh, that's not right. He didn't do the right thing." With beer, most of the situations, what you're doing is you're using the grains. It could be a mixture of grains. It could be barley. It could be 2-row barley, 6-row barley. It could be wheat. There's other things you can use, other cereal type grains. They take that stuff and they malt it. They sprout it basically, and then they cook it a little bit to different levels. And then the degree of hops you put in, we don't need hops. We're not making beer. We're just making beer to a point. Then we're stopping. No more beer. We're making alcohol. So we don't use hops. We don't need hops. But all this layering of malting and hopping and temperatures and browning and roasting the mash, roasting the hop or the barley and malt and all that is essentially for the flavor of the beer. And we don't care about the flavor of any of it because we're not going to be drinking it. So a lot of steps are going to be left out that normally would be important in beer making, but we don't need to do that. So it speeds things up a little bit. Well, let me see. I'll check the temperature again, and then maybe we can go inside. What did I say? I was at 130 before. So now we're about 150. Okay. I think we should break and go inside now because I have a few things on the screen to show, and then I have some other things.